Hello and welcome to another episode of For Zion's Sake, the CUFI UK podcast. My name is Alex and I'm joined here by Alastair.
Hello, Alex. Hello, everybody.
And this week we're going to be speaking quite extensively about Iran.
That's right. Iran well and truly went ballistic at the weekend. We're going to have a look at how Britain responded on that night and what Israel might do next.
Yeah, and the Christian Watchmen were in full force on the weekend as we prayed for Israel. And we also believe that God did act miraculously in defense of Israel.
Well, we're also going to have a look at the Bible, at when God has intervened on Israel's behalf and why he will do so again and again. So, Alex, it was hugely significant then what happened at the weekend with this attack, and unprecedented for many reasons, not least because it was the first ever time in history that Iran had directly attacked the state of Israel. Of course, Iran has done so via its proxies for years now, but this was hugely significant. It was also the world's largest ever ballistic missile attack. So when you consider what Israel faced on that day, 14th of April, we must not normalize in any way the attack that Iran carried out against the state of Israel. It was hugely significant, and incredibly, 99% of those missiles, there were 170 drones, 30 cruise missiles, and 110 ballistic missiles that were fired, and 99% were intercepted. It was incredible. In fact, I heard someone with experience in the defense sector who said that 90% would have been the maximum expectation.
Yeah.
The dream would have been a 90%.
Well, it would have been a miracle, I think he said.
Yeah.
It would have been a miracle if 90% were intercepted.
Yes.
But 99%.
99%.
Yeah, and it's actually more than 99. I think 7 got through. It's like 99.5 or something like that. It just shows like how good the defense systems turned out in the end. And I think, that it is a miracle. We should be praising God for that, and we should be saying that even though this was a military endeavor, there was obviously people around the world praying for Israel. Israelis were praying for Israel. Yeah. And I do believe that God, used everything for his good and for defending Israel.
Well, I don't know about you. We communicated on late Saturday night when the news broke that Iran had sent its drones, and it was going to take a couple of hours. And just from of course, we've had a lead up to this where an imminent attack had been suspected, and then we saw more information just prior to the weekend beginning to say that, it looks like it will be imminent. But then when the news was announced and we went onto our social media and put up a few posts, you could see the volume of the Christian response praying for the protection of Israel in a way which I think was I would say it was pretty historic, because we've had situations before where Israel has been attacked, and even though we are praying continually for Israel, there was just a moment at that time where we just saw an overwhelming number of our supporters who were engaging with us on social media, and you just had a real sense that God's hedge of protection through the power of prayer was being generated, and not just within our circle of supporters as well, because for many, many people might have gone to sleep and then woken up next morning to hear about what had happened. But around the world, bear in mind, it was daytime in the US, for example. There was just a persistent prayer and praying and lifting up Israel as watchmen on the walls, which is something that we have, watchmen on the walls day and night. Day and night. So that is significant, and we must never ever underestimate the importance of prayer and the power of prayer. But I think it was also significant for other reasons as well, not least because of Britain's significant involvement, the RAF shooting down a number of drones. That is what we want to see in terms of Britain's practical support for the defense of the state of Israel, and a coalition of nations as well which were involved. I mean, how good it was to see the RAF help in that way, and the coordination which was involved is not, I mean, from the same source. I think we probably read the same source then about this this defense expert who said, like, the chances of that cooperation working but not being as effective as it was quite high. And yet, in terms of mistakes and errors and things, but the fact that it was such an effective elimination of the threat is something that we should, I think, be thankful for.
Definitely.
In terms of Britain's participation.
Yeah, I think seeing the RAF, I mean, one of the posts we put up was, the RAF is actively involved in the defense of Israel. And it was British forces that were in the sky shooting out the Iranian threat from the sky, joining in with the USA, with Israel. Obviously, Israel was doing a lot of it.
France as well, and as well as Qatar. Sorry, not Qatar. Jordan.
Yep.
But also there was other involvement by other players as well in the Middle East that are not broadcast.
Yep.
And this is is significant because it places the value on the Abraham Accords, which were signed. This coalition of Middle East countries that signed a peace agreement with Israel a few years ago, and that has mutually benefited all those signatories, including Israel, on a number of levels, mainly so far on trade. But also, this was the first time that there had been a military response by that coalition. If those Abraham Accords had not been signed, then the story might have been much different today.
Yeah, exactly.
So actually we had, even though Saudi Arabia isn't a signatory, Saudi Arabia allowed its airspace to be freed up, which allowed the US to participate. There were other parties as well, and Iraq, even though Iraq wasn't a signatory, they freed up their airspace also. So there were other players, and that is why one of the things which has come from Iran over the past few days, apart from their weirdly celebratory success of what has taken place, which seems a bit surreal, really, because they basically just fired over 300 missiles which were taken out in thin air.
Yeah.
But nevertheless, of course, there are certain gains which Iran will see in terms of having done that, showing, in their view, a reaction to the elimination of one of their or two of their commanders. But actually, what they have been really aggravated about is the success of the coalition of the Arab nations.
Yeah, exactly.
And one of the statements which they have made was actually a rebuke of that coalition.
Yeah.
Now, one of the things which, interestingly, was speculated prior to the 7th of October was the normalization of ties between Israel and Saudi Arabia. And that got to a point where I think even on this podcast, we were reporting on sources in US government and in Israeli government that were hugely optimistic that something could have been months, if not weeks away.
Yeah.
And even Hamas said that one of the reasons why they invaded Israel on the 7th of October was because of their opposition to the peace treaty the potential peace treaty between Israel and Saudi Arabia. that shows how much the terrorists are so angered by peace.
Yeah, exactly.
Peace in the Middle East.
I know.
And yet Israel wants peace with its neighbors, achieved peace with some of these Arab nations. And you cannot underestimate how significant that is, because on a practical level, what we saw on the 14th of April was those coalition parties actually coming to support Israel militarily.
Yeah.
And had they not, I mean, Israel, we should acknowledge the fact that their brilliant anti-missile systems, of course, saved lives.
Yeah.
But the destruction would have been significant had all of Israel's allies not come to its aid, which brings us on to the importance. I think we need to acknowledge why this support needs to continue, because we don't know, as this podcast comes out, what is going to happen next.
No, exactly. And I think, looking back at some of the things you've discussed there, I think, like you said, the Abraham Accords are important for what happened over the weekend, because Israel has been able to sell UAV systems so that they've got a much wider view of what's happening in the Middle East, or happening when Iran sends over drones and missiles and so forth. So they're able to detect them a lot earlier. Obviously, you're saying, Iran has been angry at some of these allies for aiding Israel. Well, Iran invaded the airspace of Jordan.
Yes.
Jordan is allowed to shoot things out of the sky that are militarily flying, flying over its airspace. It's that side of things where I think Iran has just underestimated maybe how much the region is willing to work with Israel and not with them. And I think looking at, you're saying Hamas started October 7th because of the threat to them of a Saudi-Israel alliance. And I think what's actually happening now is the talk is back on the table that there might be an alliance with Saudi Arabia again, because actually Saudi Arabia has been threatened by Iran for a long time and is wary of Iran. And Iran has probably proven over the weekend that it is a problematic thing. And so it needs to have that alliance.
And you said that, Hamas were not happy with the peace treaty. Well, when you consider that Hamas, or Iranian regime funded Hezbollah also, I think Iran has been showing its dissatisfaction with peace in the between Israel and its Arab neighbors for some time now.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and we've discussed, was Iran behind? I mean, I think Israeli officials have actually accused Iran of being behind the October 7th attack, because they have like you said, they funded Hamas. Hamas have been using Iranian weaponry against Israel. And I think there was actually talk that when Hamas carried out the 7th of October attack, they actually jumped the gun, because they were meant to have actually had a coordinated attack with Hezbollah in the north doing the exact same attack. But because Hamas, I mean, this is obviously just speculation, by the way. I've heard some military officials and some Israeli officials actually talking about this, where they think that the plan from Iran was a much bigger attack, a wider attack on multiple fronts for Israel. And just imagine if the October 7th attack was multiplied on the northern, or replicated on the northern border, it could have been even worse. But then that also would have shown us directly if Iran's hand was behind it, because if there was that coordination between Hamas and Hezbollah, I think that would have been a very easy thing to see. But having said that, Hamas trained with Iranian forces in Iraq before the attack happened. They were using Iranian weaponry, or Iranian intelligence and things like that to carry out their attack. So I think there is, Iran's hand is on Hamas in some way. The response to the Hamas attacks has been that the Houthis in Yemen, who are completely controlled by Iran, they attacked Israel. Hezbollah in the north, they have attacked Israel. Iran itself has now attacked Israel. Iran's hand is on all of this in some way, shape or form. They may not fully control Hamas, but they definitely have an influence over Hamas. And so I think, we're seeing now with this direct attack on Israel that Iran has been emboldened. I think there's all these different narratives going out. There's on the one hand, Iran, it's being said that Iran gave Israel so much warning that, of course, they were, this was a symbolic gesture. They weren't really trying to hurt Israel. They were just trying to show them what they could do. There's other people saying, well, actually, it was a success because actually the targets that Iran wanted to hit, it did hit, and it used new weapons. I mean, I was listening to a military expert who was very pro-Iran, trying to sell it from that perspective. In reality, the Iranian leader, Khamenei, he stood on stage in front of all of his followers saying, we will hurt Israel. Tonight we're going to hurt Israel. He was proclaiming that they were going to damage Israel. All of the politicians in Iran stood in their parliament shouting, death to Israel, as the drones and rockets were being sent. They wanted this to be a big attack on Israel to embolden their terror groups, show them how serious they are. And the result was, like you said, it came to nothing. It fizzled out. Not because of Iran's lack of, what's the word? Like a lack of desire to carry out the attack. Not because even of a lack of ability for Iran, because they're using sophisticated weaponry when they're attacking. But it was actually because of Israel's defense, because of their allies, because of the defense network, and we both believe because of the hand of God as well. And like you said, Christians praying for Israel was a big part of this. Like, we were all, anyone who was paying attention, the watchmen on the walls, we were all burdened by this. I mean, yeah, some people may have gone to sleep before the news broke, sort of thing, but me and you were up well beyond when we should have been asleep, praying for Israel. I was nervous. I have to be honest. I was nervous that we could be seeing something terrible happening. And even friends of mine at church, who aren't necessarily so openly pro-Israel sort of thing, they came up to me and said, I woke up in the night multiple times just praying for Israel because I was so worried about them and that sort of thing. And I think there was, like, God was burdening us to pray for Israel. And I think it showed that, when we woke up in the morning, instead of seeing destruction, there were Israelis dancing on the street because they were safe. Yes.
Yeah. And of course, we need to continue to pray because we don't know what is going to happen next. At the time of us recording this podcast, we know that Israel is being strongly discouraged not to respond. As President Biden said, take the win. We've had our own government that has warned Israel not to escalate things further. I think our government is expecting that Israel will respond, could retaliate against Iran directly, which it would be legitimate to do so. And it hasn't had as strong a legitimacy than they have right now to strike Iranian nuclear facilities, etc., etc. But they are being strongly discouraged against that. And then you've got Iran, who have said that even if you strike us a little, is what they said, they're going to go all out. Is sort of what they're implying. So who is the warmonger in this situation? I mean, Iran, from everything we're seeing, wants the conflict. They want the escalation.
Well, they're already in conflict with Israel because through their proxies, they're attacking Israel anyway. I think what Iran doesn't want is Israel to respond to them. Because Iran for a long time has been able to strike Israel from its different proxies. And Israel strikes back in those areas. But what Iran hasn't had is a direct attack from Israel against them. And so even though this was the first time that Iran has launched a big offensive
from their own soil.
From their own soil, And this, I mean, the thing is, if we put this into perspective, just imagine if this was the UK, right? I mean, if it was, I don't know, France or even somewhere a bit further away, sort of thing, attacking the UK. I mean, this was every major city of Israel that was under threat of attack. There were, missiles being shot out of the sky above the capital city, above Jerusalem. I mean, Jerusalem is supposedly a holy place to the Iranians because it's meant to be the third holiest place in Islam, and yet Israel were the ones protecting that holy place, shooting rockets out of the sky. But I mean, if it was the UK, just imagine if over Birmingham, over London, over Glasgow, there were rockets going off and things. The UK
have you
would
seen
not.
These rockets?
I know.
They're huge. I mean, I saw the photo of one floating in the Dead Sea.
Yeah.
Imagine if one of these huge ballistic missiles was floating down the Thames.
I know.
And we'd be sitting there, and we're saying, well, I think let's take the win.
Yeah, take the win. Yeah,
take the win.
Exactly. I mean, it's crazy. I mean, and I personally, I don't know what the correct response is. Like,
no.
Ultimately, we don't want the war to be escalated, but
no.
Iran also can't be emboldened to do more attacks like this. It's just Israel has to show that it is not going to be pushed around and threatened. I mean, Iran has also made some quite outrageous comments where it's basically saying if, for example, the US is involved in defending Israel, which it was, that they would strike US targets in the Middle East and things. Well, they made that threat. It doesn't look like they're going to be carrying out that, what's the word? They're not going to be sort of actually doing what they said in that regard. So I think the same thing is with Israel. They're making a big, big threat to Israel, saying if you respond in any way, shape or form, we will strike you even harder. Ultimately, though, I think they are just posturing and saying a lot of things, and actually they don't have a lot to back up what they're saying, because ultimately, if Iran really did strike US targets directly, they would be the ones starting a regional war. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yes.
And yet the crazy thing in all of this is Iran has been and currently is, and remains it, and it's probably going to be that way for the future. They are the largest sponsor of terrorism.
Yes.
Their greatest export, other than oil, is terrorism. And on Saturday morning, they captured a ship in the Strait of Hormuz. So they've kidnapped a ship from Israel with 24 crew on board. It's what I'm saying is they, and when you look at the Houthis, Hezbollah, all the rest of it, they're already exporting terrorism. They're already starting regional conflicts. I just don't see how the world looks at it and goes, oh yeah, don't do anything with Iran because we don't want them to do anything, when they're already doing things. More Hezbollah fighters have died since October 7th than in some wars between Israel and Syria, or Israel and Lebanon, I should say. So I just think it is a case where Iran is doing what it's doing. It's going to continue to do what it's doing. And it does need a response from Israel because they have to be put in their place a bit, I think.
And also Iran is a threat to the West.
Yeah, exactly.
And Israel is the last line of defense.
Yeah.
We know that the IRGC, which is it's not the Iranian military, they're militia. They're not a military, sorry, they are militia, and it's the IRGC which is orchestrating these attacks. The IRGC, we need to make sure that we continue to support Israel. And there's been mention that whilst Britain was quite happy to cooperate in defending Israel, that our forces would not be involved in an offensive. And I understand, I think, what that means, because, when it comes to, for example, like the conflict in Ukraine, Britain is not got grounds on, boots on the ground sort of thing, but is very much supporting Ukraine in other ways. But the sentiment I'm sort of, the signals which are coming is that from the UK foreign policy is that, I'm concerned that we might not be prepared to give Israel as much support, bearing in mind that it was only a couple of weeks ago we were sitting here discussing a possible arms embargo against Israel. So, let's bear in mind that if Israel was to make an offensive, there is a possibility that the UK, wouldn't be as involved as what perhaps we would like them to be.
Yeah, exactly. And I think this is why we have to put pressure on the government to stay with Israel on this, because it's not that we want the UK to be involved in any attack on Iran or anything, but if Iran attacks Israel, we do want the UK to defend Israel.
100%.
You know, and the least we expect actually is that they will do it diplomatically. And at the moment, I think what we're seeing is a weakness from our leadership. We've discussed this in the past, where, you know, it is absolutely crazy that there was even discussions a few weeks ago that there could possibly be an arms embargo against Israel. And I would hope that that's no longer on the table. But the response from the UK, I don't think, is strong enough, because with Ukraine, when they're talking to Russia, they were still very strong. Okay, they weren't saying we're going to attack you, Russia, but they were at least saying to Russia, you will not win this war. We stand 100% behind Ukraine. You know, all these sorts of things. Ukraine has a right to take back its land, all this sort of thing. I mean, when it comes to Israel, David Cameron sort of saying, we don't want them to attack Iran. We don't want them to escalate the war. But if they do, then we want them to do just a small little thing that doesn't escalate the war. But it has to be strong, obviously, but not strong enough.
Not too strong.
And all these sorts of things. And it's like, well, like, that isn't helping Israel's cause. Like, Iran is emboldened because of the weakness of the West. The West should be standing there saying, Iran, you know, we stopped that, but you need to be aware that Israel could wipe you out now. You know, they need to. I know David Cameron would never say that, but they need to be aware. Like, you now are in violation. We are against you. We stand with Israel, and if Israel takes action against you, it's on you. It should be that kind of thing, rather than saying, Israel, don't attack. Israel, don't do anything. Don't escalate. Because Iran only listens to strength. We know this from all the Islamist groups, all the terror groups in the region and so forth. They only listen to strength. When they see weakness, that is like a shark seeing blood in the water, right? It's like it is very important for the West to stand up for Israel, so that so that Israel's enemies are not emboldened to attack Israel. And it's not because we want the UK to be involved to attack. It's because it just helps in the defense of Israel.
And if Iran is emboldened, Hezbollah, Hamas, the Houthis, they will all be emboldened.
Exactly.
So it is crucial. Now, one of the ways in which Britain could actually practically show some strength against Iran, other than providing military support to Israel, which we've established is important and we want, is to apply more sanctions on Iran. I know that has been articulated already and is probably expected to happen. But the IRGC, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, the terrorist group, they are not yet prescribed in this country. And yet here at CUFI, we've been calling for them to be banned for several years now. And in fact have had a campaign ongoing calling upon the UK government, this current government, to ban the IRGC, and that came close last year, but then it was dismissed. And the reason it was dismissed was because, actually there was large support for them to be banned in Parliament, even within the cabinet. But apparently it was because we wanted to maintain a diplomatic channel with Iran. Now, banning the IRGC would not prevent that. You know, we would still be able to have diplomatic talks with Iran even by banning the IRGC. But what it would do is that it would send a very, very strong signal that terrorism and the actions of the IRGC, as well as the channel of funding and etc., it would send a clear message that Britain stands against it. And it's the least, I would say, Britain should do right now. And in the aftermath of, you were saying before about the attack by Iran, it was, they were not just poking Israel. They wanted to cause as much destruction as possible. They knew there was going to be a defensive operation from Israel and probably allies, but their intent that was not. You do not do that unless you are wanting to, to really hurt Israel.
Yeah.
So we have to come to Israel's defense, and that is one way we should do it.
Yeah, I agree.
Banning the IRGC.
Yeah.
Now we're asking CUFI supporters to write to their MP. If you are watching and you live in the United Kingdom, then please do go to our website www.cufi.org.uk/campaigns, and we've put some suggested wording together. You can preview the wording, type in your details, your MP will automatically pop up, and you can hit the send, and they will receive an email.
Yep.
As well as the UK government calling upon Britain to ban the IRGC. It's the least we can do. It is what we should do.
Yep.
It is long overdue.
Yeah.
And it should have been done already. We shouldn't be sitting here after the largest ballistic missile attack in world history, calling for the IRGC to be banned in this country when we knew what their intent was, we knew what their capability was, and we know how much they want to see Israel destroyed. They should not even have a foothold in this country. They have.
Yeah.
And they are also a threat to our national security as well as to the Jewish community.
Yeah.
And to Europe. So let's show our strength of feeling.
Yeah.
And if not now, then I don't know when we would ban IRGC.
Yeah.
There's already in fact I saw this morning, we're calling the UK government, but I know there are similar calls taking place in other European countries. And the European Union's foreign policy chief, Josep Borrell, said that banning the IRGC could only happen if a court... So this is back in January. He said that it could only happen if a court in an EU country determined that the IRGC was guilty of terrorism. I don't think you need a court after the 14th of April.
And also, Josep Borrell is... Oh, okay.
So can I just...
Yep.
And then, this week, he said that it has come up in discussions, but could not go forward without... Bear in mind, this week, right?
Yeah,
this isn't before the weekend. It could not go forward without evidence from a, quote, nation of authority, quote, unquote, that the IRGC was involved in terrorist activity.
Yeah, I mean, that's absolutely ridiculous. Like, Josep Borrell, I mean, I haven't got anything on him. I didn't know we were going to go talking to him, but he is, he is part of the anti-Israel establishment within politics. Like, he has called Israel's actions genocide. He has spoken, in my opinion, blood libels against Israel. He has said some things which are, if they're not borderline anti-Semitic, they are anti-Semitic. And he is the head of the EU's foreign policy. He's the head of the Foreign Office of the EU. And he is a problematic person because he, even in that, he's making excuses for terror. And if you remember, when Hezbollah was outlawed a few years back, which is something we campaigned for and actually achieved, we had the same problem we were dealing with our politicians, with the EU and so forth, where they were saying, we can't ban Hezbollah because Hezbollah is linked with the Lebanese government. They were saying, we're not we've banned Hezbollah's military arm, but not their political arm, political wing, and so forth. And Hezbollah responded saying, today I'm working for the military wing, today I'm working for the political wing, because they were mocking it because it is one and the same. And I think it's the same with the IRGC. I think if it really does affect diplomatic ties, well, it shows the IRGC is so interlinked with the Iranian regime that it is part of the government. And I think that's probably that's probably the problem they've got, because as soon as they start outlawing the IRGC, it will then move into, actually, we have to outlaw parts of the government and so forth. And it could affect diplomatic ties because Iran is not only a state sponsor of terrorism, it funds, owns, and all the rest of it, the IRGC, which is a terrorist group. It's outlawed in the US. And I just think it's one of those things where Iran is a terrorist organization. That is the Iranian regime is. And I think it's just political wrangling to try and stop admitting the truth is what happened. It happened for a long time when they were dealing with Hezbollah, and finally they came to their senses and banned Hezbollah fully. But it's the same with the IRGC. The IRGC is linked with planned terror attacks on European soil with UK politicians as their victims. It was a bomb plot in, was it Paris, where a few years back where there was a it was an Iranian conference that was happening, but it was the opposition to the Iranian regime, and Iran used one of its diplomats to transport bomb materials to France for a planned attack against that conference, in which British politicians could have been killed. Thankfully, it was stopped by the security and intelligence forces, likely helped by Israel. And that was a planned attack on European soil carried out by the IRGC. I mean, Borrell is talking nonsense. He doesn't even know the subject he's talking about, and yet he's the head of the EU. I mean, I'm not even an expert on that, and I can pull that out, knowing that there is links to the IRGC. The IRGC has, operated terror within Europe. And it is a threat to Europe. They call Israel the little Satan. They call America the big Satan. But their actual worldview is that the West is the big Satan. And the West includes Europe. It includes us. I mean, they are a threat to us, and we have to start taking them seriously. And I think, like you were saying, if we're not going to stand with Israel militarily, then let's stand politically with them. Do some of these things. Outlaw the IRGC. Put stronger sanctions on Iran, help to neutralize them in a way like that will be effective, rather than just saying things. And, we're not even being effective in standing up for Israel, are we, in terms of the way our politicians are speaking about Israel and their response and things. So, in all, I just think we've got weak leadership at the front, at the top. And
I think Britain, what we saw the other night with the RAF, the amazing, just amazing success, but not just this. It wasn't just about the success, but the amazing way in which we stepped up to defend Israel is something to be admired. And, I hope we can support Israel militarily as well as politically, whatever Israel chooses to do. Because actually, we want to pray that Israel will have wisdom. So I'm not advocating exactly what Israel should do, although I believe it should. That Israel should be allowed to do what it feels it should do. We've agreed that they should be showing strength against the Iranian regime, but it is not for Britain to tell what Israel should and should not do militarily. And that's all. No, I agree. I think the other thing to bear in mind as well, with Iran's attack, it wasn't just military targets that were under threat. There was civilians. I mean, a lot of Israelis, like probably most of the country, was either fearful of the attack, were hiding in bomb shelters. Like, there was a terror to it. There was a terror element just in the fact that Israelis were fearful of what was happening. But also, the only victims that they've announced, I mean, there are a few injuries that have happened, but the main injury is a young Bedouin girl, a 7-year-old girl, who was struck with shrapnel from one of these ballistic missiles. After it was shot out of the sky, it fell onto her house. And she has a serious head injury. She's in hospital. She, is in a serious condition. Her brother was also wounded on his stomach, but he's had stitches and things, and he's back at home now. But she is, in a bad situation. And so, obviously, if anyone's listening, we do need to pray for that young girl. Her name is Amina. So, we encourage people to pray for her, 7-year-old Bedouin child. But it just shows that Iran's actions have resulted in a civilian being injured and quite severely. And there is a chance that she may not survive. So, but it shows it is terrorism that Iran is doing. Civilians are at risk, and it just shows the evil of Iran.
And thankfully, Israel stood there and defended its people, whether they are Christians, Jews, Muslims, whoever. Israel was standing with them, and showed that it will defend them. And I think another element we've not actually discussed, but there are many Iranians within Iran who are anti the regime, and they have shown their support for Israel. And I think it's important that we know this is a war between Israel and the Iranian regime, not the Iranian people. The majority of the Iranian people are wanting peace with Israel and are not haters of Israel. And we see that evidenced a lot within Iranian society, and the Iranian people need to be freed from that regime. But it is clearly a war between the Iranian regime and Israel, not the Iranian people and Israel. We have to get that clear. And, Israel is willing to be at peace with the Iranians as long as they don't want to, wipe them out. And unfortunately, the Iranian regime has made it their stated aim that they want to wipe Israel off the face of the earth. And obviously, Israel's not going to allow that. More importantly, God is not going to allow that.
The latest issue of Torch magazine from Christians United for Israel UK is out now. Arm yourself with the truth about Israel with this free magazine, available to read online instantly or received by post if you live in the UK. In this issue, we describe the horrific events of 7th of October, when Hamas invaded Israel and massacred Jews, and why it is vital we bear witness of the evil anti-Semitism that was committed on that tragic day. We also explain the rise in anti-Semitism here in Britain and how Christians must respond. Plus, we look at whether the so-called two-state solution is actually a two-state delusion. Our magazine is packed with important facts to help you stand with Israel, but it also includes articles to encourage and inspire, such as the incredible story behind Israel's national emblem and its link to the Arch of Titus, plus what God says about the land he promised to the Jewish people. Get your copy today by going to cufi.org.uk/torch. And on that note, let's turn to scripture, shall we, Alex? Because one of the thoughts that I've had past few days is there is a tendency for even our politicians to be supportive of Israel when it is under attack, but then questions whether it should support Israel when Israel is on the offensive, when Israel is then defending itself, even though they say that Israel has a right to defend itself. When it comes to reality, I think one of the things we've learned since the 7th of October was that it was one thing to stand with Israel when they were victim of terrorism. It was another thing when Israel was then defending itself by launching attacks against terrorism. That's where we began to see some of the support waver in this country. And I think looking at it spiritually, for Christians, it is also, for many Christians, or for some Christians, it is fairly easy to stand with Israel when Israel is a victim, when Israel is suffering and is under attack. But then support wavers when Israel then defends itself and is victorious and is successful. There is, I think, a mentality that Israel almost is not allowed to be victorious and successful and damage the enemy, crush the enemy. I don't know if
Yeah, I think you're right. I think, we saw a lot of outpouring of Christian love for Israel after October the 7th, for example, but as the war continued, actually Christian support waned for Israel, which was troubling to see. And I think, again, there is an element that this attack by Iran against Israel has brought out a lot of Christian support, but the future in the next few weeks, really, I think we'll see who really has a heart for Israel and a heart for understands God's viewpoint on this situation.
And also, I think there are some within the church who will almost judge Israel based upon the fact that they are taking what seems to be a natural military into their own hands, and they almost think, well, they don't have to do that because God's will be done one way or another.
Yeah.
And we see from the Bible that God, for Israel, God gives them a mandate to actually, I say, take things into their own hands, to want to an extent, but then time and time again proves his faithfulness in actually supernaturally coming to Israel's defense.
Yeah.
And we must be very careful that we do not, that we understand what God's will is, and we pray for God's will, but actually we understand that the God of Israel, he who watches over Israel, is not slumbering or sleeping.
Yeah.
So we need to support Israel, mindful that, God is faithful to his people. And one of the scriptures is Joshua chapter 10, which I think is just an amazing testament of God's faithfulness, where he commissioned Israel to take on the enemy, and yet he intervened in a most incredible way. This is what it says. So Joshua ascended from Gilgal, and he and all the people of war with him, and all the mighty men of valor. And the Lord said to Joshua, do not fear them, for I have delivered them into your hand. Not a man of them shall stand before you. Joshua therefore came upon them suddenly, having marched all night from Gilgal. So the Lord routed them before Israel, killed them with a great slaughter at Gibeon, and chased them along the road that goes to Beth Horon, and struck them down as far as Ezekah and Makkedah. And it happened, as they fled before Israel, and were on the descent of Beth Horon, that the Lord cast down large hailstones from heaven on them, as far as Ezekah, and they died. There were more who died from the hailstones than the children of Israel killed with the sword. I'll say that again. There were more who died from the hailstones than the children of Israel killed with the sword. Then Joshua spoke to the Lord in the day when the Lord delivered up the Amorites before the children of Israel. And he said in the sight of Israel, and this is quite amazing when we consider what happened last week with the eclipse. Okay, it says, sun, stand still over Gibeon, and moon in the valley of Ajalon. So the sun stood still, and the moon stopped, till the people had revenge upon their enemies. Is this not written in the book of Jasher? So the sun stood still in the midst of heaven, and did not hasten to go down for about a whole day. And there has been no day like that, before it or after it, that the Lord heeded the voice of a man, for the Lord fought for Israel. The Lord fought for Israel. And we see this repeatedly in the Bible. And some Christians who are not supportive of Israel might say, oh, well, that was in the Old Testament, that was that time and whatever. Well, actually, if we turn to Ezekiel 38, still in the Old Testament, of course, but this is talking about a future time.
Yeah.
The battle of Gog and Magog. And it says from verse 18, and it will come to pass at the same time when Gog comes against the land of Israel, says the Lord God, that my fury will show in my face, for in my jealousy and in the fire of my wrath I have spoken. Surely in that day there shall be a great earthquake in the land of Israel, so that the fish of the sea, the birds of the heavens, the beasts of the field, all creeping things that creep on the earth, and all men who are on the face of the earth shall shake at my presence. The mountains shall be thrown down, the steep places shall fall, and every wall shall fall to the ground. I will call for a sword against Gog throughout my mountains, says the Lord. Every man's sword will be against his brother, and I will bring him to judgment with pestilence and bloodshed. I will rain down on him. That's interesting, because it's talking about almost a similarity, not exactly the same, a similarity to something which took place in Joshua 10. There's, I will rain down on him, on his troops, and on the many peoples who are with him, flooding rain, great hailstones again, fire and brimstone. Thus I will magnify myself and sanctify myself, and I will be made known in the eyes of many nations. Then they shall know that I am the Lord. So again, the Lord undertakes the Lord defends Israel.
Yep.
The Lord defeats the enemy of Israel.
Yeah.
And yet this is an event which has not yet happened.
Mm.
And I've just given an example of an historic event in Joshua which has happened. And here we are in between. And there are some Christians who are saying that Israel's offensive against his enemies are not necessarily lining up with the will of God.
Mm-hmm.
Well, let the God of Israel be a judge of that,
Yeah.
and not us.
Mm-hmm.
Let God will determine whether or not this is a battle he's going to intervene in, or one which he will supernaturally intervene in.
Yeah.
That's understanding the will of God. When we saw 99%, okay, we know and we have seen Israel suffer. We have seen Israel attacked. We've seen a loss of life. But when we have defense experts say there is something which was unique and unusual about this particular event, and we don't quite understand why. We don't need to understand why. But one thing we do need to recognize, and as Christians we must agree on, and that is the God of Israel is watching over his people.
Yeah.
And in his time, for his purpose and for his glory, so that he might be made known, he is at work.
Yeah.
So let's pray in confidence for Israel that, and this is so important, that as Christians, we get behind Israel and support Israel both in whatever they choose to do regarding their enemies, as much as we might do when Israel is on the back foot being attacked.
Yeah.
And that's a lesson, I think, that many in the church have got to understand. And thankfully, we're in the company of people here on this podcast, listening and watching, who have a heart for Israel.
Yeah.
And will support Israel.
No matter what.
No matter what.
Yeah, exactly. And I think, you've hit the nail on the head there. It's like in the past, God defended Israel just as he promised to defend Israel. In the future, God will defend Israel just as he promised, because God is the same yesterday, today, and forever. And if people are wanting to misrepresent scripture or pretend God is something else or whatever, they are not aligning with the word of God. And that is a problem because God is clear in the Bible where he stands with Israel. You've proven it today with two scriptures looking both at the past and the future. And so that's why we believe something supernatural happened just this past weekend, because all the things aligned that needed to align for Israel to be protected, because the God of Israel is watching over Israel right this moment. And he neither slumbers nor sleeps. We're watchmen. Me and you both went to sleep while, it's probably just after the attacks had concluded, actually, but it's that sort of thing where we can't always be there. Israel's allies will not always be there, but God will always be there for them. Yeah. And, it's a reassurance in Scripture.
And that, I also think, on a side note, we've placed a lot of emphasis on the allies and the necessity for the allies to come to Israel's side. And that's something we pray about. But if all of those allies were to leave Israel standing alone, and I believe that there will be a time when that happens, that we can be absolutely certain that, just as we saw in Joshua 10, the Lord will defeat the enemies of Israel.
Yeah.
And that's a wonderful promise. And that's the promise we hold on to.
Yep.
And everything else, what we know and what we don't know and what we don't understand in the present times, we can at least, in the light of his promises, have full confidence that God has not let his people go.
Yeah, exactly.
And so we just want to express our thanks and appreciation for standing with us, recognizing that your support for CUFI helps us get this message across throughout this nation. And it is really on our hearts, it is our burden that our nation will stand with the nation of Israel, and that more Christians will stand with Israel, because really the Lord wants to bless this nation of ours, but we've got to get right with what God says in his word on so many things, but particularly we're talking about getting right in terms of supporting Israel and what God views on Israel. Now we have a few things that you can do to help support as well as liking, sharing, commenting, subscribing to this podcast and sharing it with your friends. But also, there are other ways as well. We appreciate you praying for the ministry and being part of us in praying for Israel. And there are also other methods, such as supporting through a financial donation if you are able to give at this time. We have a partnership, which is the opportunity to support the work of CUFI on a monthly basis through a donation, and also to give as a one-off donation. And at this particular time, we are offering this wristband, which says Israel lives, and this is an act of solidarity with the state of Israel, but also a personal reminder on our person that we need to pray for Israel and remember Israel. This is something that we are offering as a gift in appreciation for any donation given at this time. But to receive it, please do make sure that you follow the link in the description so that we can match up the gift with your donation. So thank you very much, Alex. Anything else to say?
No, just keep praying for Israel, keep trusting God, keep reading the word, because that's where we get our direction on this. And we'll see you next time.
See you next time. God bless you.